I'm Nick Brooks, a California attorney, and today we're asking how far a YouTuber can go in calling Turning Point's leaders criminals. A little while ago, Wolves in Finance dropped a long video alleging fraud and prison level misconduct based on public records. We'll dig into defamation, fraud, and more commentary becomes accusation. In this newest episode, Zach DeGregorio, the accountant behind Wolves in Finance, pulls TPUSA's 990s, social posts about ballot chasing, and an unusual treasury letter, then walks viewers to the conclusion that multiple named executives are lying to the IRS, stealing donations, and, quote, should go to prison. Let me start by being fair to Zach. Zach clearly knows how to read 990s, understands the difference between a 501c3 and a 501c4, and spots real tension between Turning Point Action's tiny reported political spending and the ballot harvesting branding they brag about online. As a litigator, where I get nervous about Zach is where he jumps from this looks inconsistent with the rules to this is fraud. In law, fraud does not just mean this feels shady. It usually means a false statement plus intent to deceive someone out of money or cause loss. In his recent video, Zach highlights underreported political activity of TPUSA, a strange constellation of related nonprofits, missing employees, and donors who never got promised hats. Then he says things like, they are lying to the IRS, they stole donations, and that the whole structure is fraudulent. However, those are big conclusions to hang on incomplete data. Zach himself admits that he does not have full access to the books, that he's not doing a real audit, and that innocent explanations are possible. It's entirely possible nobody at TPUSA had specific intent to deceive donors or the IRS. Some of this could be aggressive structuring, bad judgment, or sloppy compliance rather than a deliberate scheme. When intent is that uncertain, jumping straight to fraud and they stole donations is not just morally loaded, it's legally loaded, because fraud is the word we reserve for intentional deception, not every questionable filing. It's funny because you can also hear Zach trying to stay in the protected lane as he does his video. For example, Zach says, in my opinion, this looks illegal. This warrants investigation. That's smart, and courts do give more room where you clearly anchor yourself in disclosed facts and frame what you're doing as interpretation. At the same time, for those who watch the video, Zach puts prison on screen next to specific names and images of individuals, compares them to mobsters convicted for tax evasion, and literally says that if you apply the Bannon standard, the entire leadership team would go to prison. That sounds less like analysis and more like a sentencing memo. And it's not just the words, it's the tone. Zach's voice almost rises into, aha, we've caught you red-handed. There's nowhere left to hide now mode, almost like a prosecutor giving a closing argument. In a defamation case, a jury is allowed to factor that tone in. If you sound certain you nailed TPUSA and present it as a big gotcha moment, it's much harder to later say, I was just floating tentative opinions about public filings. Defamation law cares less about whether you sprinkle, in my opinion, and more about how a reasonable viewer hears you. If you describe concrete conduct, name real people, and say they're criminals who should be locked up, a jury is allowed to treat that as a factual accusation, not just spicy commentary. If TPUSA ever sues Zach for defamation, this does not get decided by a YouTube chat, unfortunately. It gets decided by a jury. The jury will sit in a courtroom, watch the clips with prison over people's faces, hear they stole donations and they are lying to the IRS, said by Zach, and answer one core question. Did a reasonable viewer understand this as he's accusing them of crimes or just colorful commentary? I can tell that Zach is betting that phrases like, in my opinion, and this looks illegal, and allegedly keep him safe. The real question is not how he labels it, it's how a jury hears it. 12 jurors won't parse every qualifier. They'll remember the prison thumbnails, the mobster analogies, and the absolute statements about fraud and lying. In a civil defamation case, TPUSA would have to convince that jury, at least by a preponderance of the evidence, that key statements about them, such as fraud, stealing, lying to the IRS, were more likely than not false at the time they were made. At the same time, when Zach talks about TPUSA, he's using criminal language such as should go to prison, even while admitting there might be innocent explanations and that he doesn't have the full books. In other words, Zach's asking a civil jury to give him the benefit of uncertainty while describing other people like criminals, despite the very reasonable doubt he keeps acknowledging. On the criminal side, the state cannot convict these people unless it proves every element beyond a reasonable doubt. And a lot of what Zach says, such as, we don't have a real audit, we don't know everything, there could be innocent explanations, is exactly the kind of doubt that would stop a jury from finding guilt. Now, I can already hear some of you in the comments, such as, Nick, the leaders at TPUSA and the government are corrupt. They'll let Erica's lawyers send cease and desist letters to a YouTuber, but the feds will always protect TPUSA and Erica's friends. That frustration with institutions is real. I'm not ignoring it. But even if you believe the system is captured and corrupt, it does not create a special YouTube court where one creator gets to hand down criminal verdicts. You can say the IRS is asleep, state AGs are political, or the nonprofit rules are broken. You still don't get a legal blank check to label private citizens criminals. Zach's own theory actually illustrates this tension. Zach points to what he thinks is President Donald Trump's handwriting on a Treasury letter about Turning Point and says this could be impeachment level interference in an IRS matter. If that's true, Zach is basically telling you this: the person controlling federal enforcement is protecting TPUSA. If the very institutions that brings cases are, in Zach's narrative, compromised, then it's almost impossible he'll see these people at TPUSA indicted. But that does not mean, therefore, I, as a YouTuber, get to stand in for the jury and pronounce these individuals at TPUSA as criminals. It means we're stuck in a really ugly legal and political tension. The irony is that Zach is very effective when he stays in his watchdog lane, such as, here's the statute, here's Schedule C, here's what's labeled ballot chasing, here's why 3% political spending does not pass the smell test, here's how donors say they were misled. That's all core protected commentary on public issues. Zach steps over the line when he moves from this pattern looks inconsistent with the law to these specific people are stealing, lying to the IRS, and belong in prison with no indictment, no conviction, and while admitting he hasn't seen the full books. That's where commentary starts to sound like a verdict. If you found this video helpful, please hit like so more people see it. And before you go, tell me in the comments, is Zach being a necessary watchdog or acting like a YouTube prosecutor? If someone you know follows TPUSA or works in nonprofit compliance, send this video to them so they can see where the legal line really is. And if you want more videos like this from a California attorney, subscribe and turn on notifications so that you don't miss the next episode. Thank you very much.